There's no safe place left in Beirut, according to Mayor Abdullah Darich, referring to the impact of Israeli airstrikes on the city, which continue. Earlier today, he was speaking to the BBC and saying that the massive influx of displaced people in the city has pushed it to the limit of its tolerance. He says a ceasefire could help the city breathe out her stress, and that if there is no ceasefire, in his words, we will break. It comes as the Israeli military expands its ground offensive in southwest Lebanon in what it has called a limited, localized and targeted operation against Hezbollah. The Israeli Defense Forces says its soldiers have taken over a Hezbollah compound with weapons aimed at northern Israel. The compound, which was discovered in southern Lebanon, included a residential building, an olive grove, and underground infrastructure. Hezbollah has not commented on these claims. The expanded invasion follows Israel's evacuation orders of more than 20 villages in the region. The IDF told evacuees to leave their homes and head north of the Awali River. About 1.2 million people have been displaced within the country since Israel stepped up airstrikes last month, and more than 1,400 have been killed in Lebanon. Meanwhile, Hezbollah says it's fired more than 100 rockets into Israel's Haifa and Galilee region in a space of 1 hour. It is the largest barrage targeting the area since the exchange of cross-border fire between Israel and Hezbollah. According to Israel, its air defenses continued to intercept multiple rockets fired across the Lebanon border. Israel's air defenses initially detected 85 rocket launches from Lebanon. And Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says his country does not seek tension and war, but is prepared should Israel want to test it. Araghchi was addressing a news conference in Tehran where he informed that any strike on Iranian infrastructure would be met with a stronger retaliation. Iran attacked Israel last week with a salvo of missiles. Israel is yet to retaliate, but has promised to do so in its own time. According to Araghchi, our policy is not the policy of war and continued tension, although we are ready for it. And the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, has told the bloc's parliament that the situation in Lebanon is getting worse by the day. He says, according to figures, some 20% of the Lebanese population has been forced to move, and that bombardments by Israel have affected communication tools with Syria, and the Syrian migrants are now trying to get back to Syria to escape the situation in Lebanon. It calls for the observance of a ceasefire through diplomatic means, and that the Lebanese army is still a very weak entity that finds it difficult to pay its soldiers. He says the country's military capacity does not make it possible to be a counterweight to Hezbollah. Let's bring in the VOA's Linda Gradstein. She's in Jerusalem. Linda, great to talk to you. And do talk to us about some more, of course, about Israel's ground operation in Lebanon. What is the strategy here, according to the IDF?
Well, the army says that all it's trying to do is to get Hezbollah to move back from the border so that the 60-something thousand Israelis who have been forced out of their homes along the border, as well as something like 100,000 Lebanese who have had to leave those villages that you were just talking about, so that the people can go back to their homes. Now, there is a UN resolution 1701 after the last war between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006, in which Hezbollah is not supposed to be south of the Litani River, and that has basically just been ignored. And what they say they're trying to do is to hit the infrastructure, the Hezbollah infrastructure that can strike across the border tunnels. They say that they have information that Hezbollah was planning an attack very similar to what Hamas did on October 7th that we talked about yesterday, when thousands of Hamas gunmen kind of flooded into Israel. And so they say they're trying to make sure that Hezbollah cannot threaten northern Israel the way that it has done over the past time. So there's a fourth division that has now gone into Lebanon, but as it's not really going deeper in, it's going along the border, but it's operating in villages and areas that Israel has not yet operated in since it started its ground invasion at the end of last month. In addition, Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, said that the person who was supposed to be the successor to Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, who Israel assassinated, so that this successor, his name is Safadin, that he was most likely killed in an Israeli airstrike last week.
I have heard about that, but there are fears from the international community Israel could be applying the same tactics it had in Gaza, in Lebanon.
Well, the difference is that Israel's goal in Gaza was to completely destroy Hamas. And that entailed taking over Gaza, which is basically Israel is now in control of most of Gaza, and there are Israeli troops, at several key points. And Israel has said that it will remain in Gaza until it can come up with an alternative to Hamas, which was ruling Gaza. The difference is that Lebanon is a sovereign country, although its sovereignty is somewhat weak, and that Israel has no territorial ambitions in Lebanon. It doesn't want to take over Lebanon. It doesn't even want to destroy Hezbollah. It just wants to move Hezbollah back from the border.
So Lebanon does have a caretaker government, but the army, according to the EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, is not capable of fighting Hezbollah. Are they strong enough, however, to stand against the Israeli army and this ground incursion into Lebanon?
No, and they're not trying. I mean, the Lebanese army has not been seen in South Lebanon. The only fighters that have been in South Lebanon have been Hezbollah fighters. And Israel says it has killed several hundred of those Hezbollah fighters. And the Lebanese army is really not well trained. It cannot really present a threat. Israel has a very well trained army. It has a lot of weaponry. So I don't think the Lebanese army can really, even if it wanted to, but I don't believe that it doesn't want a direct conflict with Israel. That's, the last thing that it wants.
And not being able to defend your own country is an even greater threat. The Hezbollah, however, has claimed it's fired dozens of projectiles into Israel today. The most is said it sent in an hour. How has this impacted Israel's offensive against the militant group, if it has in any way?
It really hasn't, because those rockets are being fired at civilian areas in the city of Haifa in northern Israel. It has sent Israelis running to the bomb shelters. They just announced that schools have now been closed in those areas as Hezbollah has increased its fire. And that, but again, because Israelis have, bomb shelters or safe rooms built either in their apartment or in their building. If they follow the orders, which are, that you have a certain amount of time to get to your bomb shelter and you close the door and you do what you're supposed to do, then the damage, there won't be a lot of casualties. If Israelis start ignoring those rules, or in certain places, especially, for example, in Bedouin areas, there are no shelters and no safe rooms, then it's possible there'll be casualties. There have been a few Israelis wounded. A woman in her 70s was wounded from shrapnel today, but there haven't been casualties. So most of those rockets are being shot down by Israel's Iron Dome anti-missile system in any case.
It's been days now since the Iranian attack on Israel. The world's still waiting for Israel's response to that. Do you think the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is possibly consulting with international partners, the US and the UK, for the best possible response?
It's possible, but my guess is that he is saying to them that Israel will do what it thinks it is best for Israel, that it will not really take into account what the international community wants. My guess is that the U.S. and the U.K. would say, Iran, you attacked, Iran by assassinating the Hezbollah leader and allegedly killing Hamas leader in Tehran, which was kind of a slap in the face. The Iranians responded with, dozens of missiles, but that didn't kill anybody. let's let it go now. But Israel is insisting that it's going to respond to that missile attack, that it can't just do nothing to that.
In addition to that, the Iranian foreign minister says Iran does not seek war. He says it is, however, prepared should Israel want to test its will. This appears to be more of a bait, but I'm wondering, for the Israeli government, are they considering this as a threat from Iran? And is this something that could further influence Israel's response to those airstrikes on Tuesday?
Well, I think that, Israel has already made a decision that it is going to respond. And I think that as soon as Iran fired dozens or more than, I think it was something like 180 long-range missiles at Israel, it became a regional war. The question is, what is Israel's target going to be? Some hardliners in the Israeli government are calling on Israel to hit the Iranian nuclear sites. That would almost certainly mean a big expansion of the war, perhaps American involvement, Russian involvement. The most likely, I think, is that they will hit Iranian infrastructure. Maybe there will be cyber attacks on some of the Iranian nuclear sites, but that Israel will stop one step short of a complete all-out war with Iran and will hit, military sites, but not necessarily nuclear sites.
But this will not be a war between Iran and Israel, will it?
Well, I mean, what Israel says is that it basically is in a 7-front war already, that it's fighting in Gaza, it's fighting in Lebanon. And the truth is that Hezbollah is basically a proxy force of Iran. Hezbollah is funded by Iran. It gets its weapons from Iran. It's fighting against the Houthis in Yemen, which are sending ballistic missiles, and the Houthis again are an Iranian proxy. It's fighting the Palestinians in the West Bank, and it's fighting a cyber war. So I think Israel kind of already is almost in a war with Iran. The question is, and the United States has sent an additional troop carrier and more troops. The sense I get, though, is that this war in Lebanon is not going to be a very protracted war. It's going to be a few weeks, and then there will be some sort of a deal that will get Hezbollah to be north of the Litani River to observe UN Resolution 1701, and that nobody, neither Israel nor Lebanon nor the United States, wants a really protracted conflict.
So, Linda, if you could explain this, why will the war in Lebanon not be protracted, but the war in Gaza has continued for about a year now?
So, first of all, the war in Gaza now has sort of wound down, and it's more a question of, a lot of the troops that were in Gaza have now been transferred to Lebanon. But in Gaza, the only governing power is Hamas. There's no alternative to Hamas. There's nobody for Israel to turn power over to. In Lebanon, at least theoretically, you do have the Lebanese government, so that Israel can say to the Lebanese government, perhaps backed by Arab states, we are, acting against Hezbollah. If you can guarantee that Hezbollah will stay north of the Litani, if you can guarantee that Hezbollah will not attack Israel, then we are willing to withdraw. I don't think Israel intends to maintain to stay in Lebanon long term, although I did speak to one security analyst who said to me that that's what Israel was saying in 2006, and they ended up being there for not into the last time, and they ended up being there for 18 years. So I think there's also, Israel feels that Hezbollah started this war, that Hezbollah was planning an attack on Israel, but that Israel doesn't really have any territorial designs in Lebanon. It doesn't want a situation like the situation in Gaza, where troops, are stuck, and you've had hundreds of Israeli soldiers. I think the number is like 350 soldiers have been killed in the fighting in Gaza. So I think they want to hit Hezbollah and then turn the responsibility back to the Lebanese government.
Thank you again, Linda, and do stay safe.
Thank you.
Well, pro-Palestinian protesters in Canada gathered on Monday to protest against what they said is their government's complicity in Israel's war in Gaza. Flags, smoke flares, and signs bearing the pictures and names of victims lined the protests in front of Ontario's Parliament Hall and the ensuing march. This held just as people around the world held memorials for the 1,200 Israelis killed in a major Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, and for the 101 people still in Hamas captivity.
This genocide did not start 1 year ago. This occupation has been going on for 76 years. So we are going to continuously spreading the truth, and we're going to hit the streets as many times as we possibly can to actually gain our justice for our people. And as a Palestinian, it's a very, very sad day today that it's been 1 year and this Canadian government has not done something to stop this ongoing genocide or impose any sanctions on Israel.
Canada bears direct responsibility for enabling this genocide and act of terror in Palestine, Lebanon, and in the region. We will continue to take to the streets no matter how long it takes, to make sure and to crystallize our demands for an arms embargo, and that Canada needs to act now to stop funding, arming, and backing Israel. We will continue to reflect the resilience of the people of Gaza, of the people of Palestine, of the people of Lebanon, to hold our government accountable for their complicity and to continue to demand for an arms embargo. Our tax dollars should not go and fund the mass slaughter of innocent civilians and innocent children.
Adding his voice to the conversation surrounding Israel's war against Hamas and Hezbollah in the Middle East, U.S. Republican presidential candidate and former President of the United States, Donald Trump, has blamed the current U.S. leadership for the Hamas attacks 1 year ago that sparked the war in Gaza. Trump said he was committed to reinforcing the ties between the U.S. and Israel and repeated a phrase he'd used over the past year, which is, the October 7 attack would never have happened if I was president.
October 7th was not just the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It was not just the worst terror attack since 9/11. It was an attack on humanity itself. It was a hideous, incredible cruelty. It was chilling savagery. It was demonic delight and the destruction of innocent life on October 7th. It seemed as if the gates of hell had sprung open and unleashed their horrors onto the world, and that's exactly what happened. The bond between the United States and Israel is strong and enduring, and if and when they say, when I'm president, I don't say that, I never say that, if and when I'm president of the United States, it will once again be stronger and closer than it ever was before. We have to win this election. If we don't win this election, there's tremendous consequence for everything. You know, I say that November 5th will be the most important day in the history of our country. I think it will also be the most important day in the history of Israel, if you want to know the truth. I believe that. I think you believe that too. And a lot of that has to do with the leadership of this country. This attack, that's true. We need leadership. Thank you. Thank you. The October 7th attack would never have happened if I was president. I can tell you. So here is my commitment to you on the solemn date. I will not allow the Jewish state to be threatened with destruction. I will not allow another Holocaust of the Jewish people. I will not allow a jihad to be waged on America or our allies. And I will support Israel's right to win its war on terror, and it has to win it fast. No matter what happens, it has to go fast.
U.S. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is in Jerusalem, where he's called on Saudi Arabia and Israel to normalize relations by the end of the year. The Biden administration has been brokering a normalization agreement between the two Middle East countries that would include U.S. security guarantees for Gulf state Saudi Arabia, among other bilateral agreements between Washington and Riyadh. Graham, who met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday, said he would now travel to Saudi Arabia, where he would meet de facto ruler Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the United Arab Emirates to meet with President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. The UAE established ties with Israel back in 2020. Graham said the two-state solution, an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, had been dead ever since last year's raid on Israel by the Palestinian Hamas.
I'm here to tell you, if by Christmas we do not have normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, then Iran will have had a strategic victory. October the 7th was designed to stop a march toward normalization. Here's what I'm going to tell Saudi Arabia. We can get you a treaty through the Senate between the United States and Saudi Arabia, a defense agreement like you have with Japan and Australia, if you do it on President Biden's watch. The next president would have a very difficult time getting 67 votes. What has to happen shortly is Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates have to come together and find a solution for the Palestinian problem where the Arabs will take over the Palestinian file. There'll be a reformed PA in the West. There'll be a rebuilding of Gaza. They'll change the education system so you no longer teach the hatred of the Jewish people. There will be a hopeful life presented to the Palestinians. It will be a de-radicalized enclave. It will be a demilitarized enclave with security guarantees for the state of Israel. The Palestinians are going nowhere. Israel's going nowhere.
The idea of a two-state solution right now seems to be an anathema here. At the same time, any enduring, comprehensive peace for the region has to include some form of self-determination and self-governance for Palestinian people. I've supported a two-state solution. I believe it still is a worthwhile goal. I'm not sure it is achievable in the present circumstance immediately, but I do believe that there is a path that's achievable toward self-determination and self-governance.